They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things.
So, Chris, worldwide developer conference from Apple has occurred. I don't think anyone ever says it as worldwide developer conference, but there you go. WWDC happened. And of course, the whole conference was about generative AI. Just kidding. Yeah. Literally, they didn't even use the AI word once. And this being Apple, it was clearly crafted to intentionally not use the AI bad word.
Yeah, exactly. I guess they don't have a play in that space really, and so they don't want the conversation switching to that.
I don't know if it was that. It seemed like they intentionally just didn't say it to start to position themselves as the, around this whole privacy angle that they've had for years, which is we're going to not say it because people are scared of it. And so we're just going to protect you from this big bad world of potential threats from AI. That's maybe, I think, the angle they're going to play here.
Yeah, and the few things they do have are like running local models on the phone and not like automatically sending everything on your phone to the cloud for processing and that kind of thing.
We'll get to the whole Vision Pro thing in a moment, but I thought this like little meme here from Twitter, which I'll read out for listeners. What did you do with generative AI? Microsoft, we built a copilot for the web. Google, we created Bard. Apple, we fixed autocorrection.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's so simplistic what they're doing.
So for those that aren't aware, they are using a large language model or a language model on the phone to run the machine learning so that your autocorrect starts to personalize to you. So it's going to be the end days for ducking hell, which everyone is more than familiar with from Apple phones.
Yeah, and like it's as simplistic as it is. I mean, I haven't used an iPhone for over 10 years, but those kind of things get real. I mean, it's your day-to-day life. They get really frustrating. So I think that, them addressing those incremental things with the tech where they can is nice.
Their autocorrect is notoriously bad, though. So I think if this is the main thing to come out of AI, not the death of all humans or extinction of mankind, having better autocorrect on your phone is a good innovation.
Yeah, and I think Apple sort of has a way of applying technology. They do it a little later than others, but they do it better and they do it classy and all that sort of stuff. It's very polished. So I can see why they're not just getting into the wild west of AI just immediately and all in.
It is interesting too, because we speculated maybe they'll build some improvements into Siri. Maybe Siri's going to get some better features or just improve to actually being a useful assistant. But the only innovation we saw was that they've just changed it from "Hey Siri" to "Siri" now when you want to signal this the Siri thing. So
yeah, I mean, anytime I get a new Mac or whatever, the first thing I do is disable Siri. It's got to be the most useless and annoying thing ever invented.
Yeah, and I saw this week Microsoft are actually killing finally Cortana, their virtual assistant. For the new Copilot as well. So it does show, I think, the days of those assistants are over. But of course, the big story out of WWDC was this, strapping the what do they even call it? Apple Vision Pro to your face and entering the augmented reality world by Apple. And it was interesting because we heard rumors early on and we even speculated on this podcast about the fact maybe they were going to use generative AI to create new worlds that we would live in, and we had all of this amazing dreams for the product. And then it turns out it's like, you can sit on the couch alone watching a movie or watch your kids and create a 3D memory of a moment instead of living in the moment.
Yeah, it's like, don't worry about the actual moment. Let's just remember it. It's like anytime you go to like a kid's performance at school, it's just everyone holding up their phones for the entire performance. And like, even when they're like, please don't, no filming. And then everyone just films the entire thing. I think the smart thing is just let someone else film it and ask them for a copy of their video.
Yeah, I find myself doing it too. You have that urge now to just record everything because like, I need to watch this later or keep this memory. But then I never actually there's not enough human time for me to go back and just like sit and go through Google Photos and watch every video or thing. And so I find myself not living in the moment as much. And I wanted to call out an article that said Internet has discovered the saddest thing about Apple's Vision Pro headset. And it's the father with the headset on watching his kids creating a 3D memory of this moment. And I'm like...
It is a kind of dystopian, awful image, isn't it? Like, I'm surprised they included that for that exact reason.
Yeah, I think that it made me think about these two visions of the future around the two main trends in technology now. One being all the hype and the news around AI and how it's going to, on one hand, help save humanity and be great and solve all of our problems. On the other, it might, kill us. We'll get to that a little bit later. But then as usual. Yeah. But then on the other side of the equation, which it's like, okay, now let's strap a computer to our head. And
it's just something so desperately unnatural about it, isn't there? It really just doesn't seem right. And I don't know, like, it's a tricky one. I do think, a lot of people have said for a long time, augmented reality is going to do better because a lot of people find the full immersion one really sickening. They feel sick or disconcerted. Or for me, I feel paranoid. Like, I have an Oculus, and if I ever put that on, I only do it when I'm home alone. And I know that no one's going to run up and attack me. Like, I find it really stressful to use. And I just can't see it being like a major part of the future.
I mean, for me personally, and the idea of having a headset on and being able to create a huge monitor wherever I am and do my work through that means, if it didn't create a lot of eye strain and it didn't ruin your neck from the weight of the device.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, then I think I would be a big fan of using it in the work context. It would be so cool to just go into a room and have an empty desk and you just slap on a headset and get to work. I think that would be pretty cool.
That is true. You're right. If they can deliver on that vision, it's good. Like, I've tried doing things like that on Oculus, and the two issues I had were getting eye focus, in maintaining eye focus, and the paranoia. But yeah, I guess with augmented reality, it's going to be a bit easier to achieve. And the earlier reports on this thing that it's actually pretty good and actually worth the hype. So I wouldn't doubt it from Apple either.
Yeah, but going back to that vision of the future thing, it just feels like with ChatGPT and how it's being used already by hundreds of millions of users worldwide to improve their productivity and eventually, hopefully, solve health issues and have all these great impacts for society and humanity. And that's a really accessible view of the future. The AI narrative right now feels like the invention of electricity to me. We've invented this new technology. This is a technology that should, in theory, through hopefully the open source community, be in everyone's hands, or everyone will benefit from it in certain ways. That's my hope. But on the other hand, there's another view of the future from Apple, which is immerse yourself, have to spend $3,500 US on this headset. I know the price will come down over time.
It's we can quietly sit and watch a family movie at home for $20,000 US or something, because each person's going to need one.
But yeah, I was hopeful that this would actually be the first application of AI in a virtual world where you could slap your headset on and have this AI agent sitting next to you in the virtual world working with you. This was my dream, right? And it's your assistant.
That's not to say that won't come, because remember when Apple first released the iPhone, they didn't even have an app store. So I think that if it takes off and they keep it and there's new generations, it doesn't die like the Touch Bar, then there will be those AI applications. Surely the people who have early access to this thing to develop on it are developing AI-based applications for it. They must be.
Imagine those slapping it on in your house and there's just these characters walking around. You create almost fictitious characters in your life and roommates. You could truly live in this augmented world where there's these video game characters that you're working with. And I know one of our listeners, he's actually working on this VR nostalgia simulator type thing where you can go back into this retro time of technology and be immersed in it. And someone like him could now, with this headset, create that world, deliver that as an app and have these characters from the past. Like you could sort of go back to the 90s, like holodeck style, thanks to a combination of this headset plus
And the
AI.
AI, yeah, and have that sort of dynamic environment you've spoken about in the past where the actions you take in the fake world actually have real consequences that have knock-on effects and memories and those kind of things. It isn't just NPCs that are pre-programmed in a certain way. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and you can
I
go
can
in
see
and
that.
like screw with that world, like sort of being Grand Theft Auto. I still think all of these visions of that potential future of being the entertainment value of AI plus this immersion of AR and VR is going to be a winner.
Yeah, and then the other thing I've always had the vision ever since Google Glass came out is this idea that the augmented reality combined with some sort of database at the time and now with the AI lookup is, I see someone, I've forgotten their name, I've forgotten their kids' names, I've forgotten all this stuff about them. And then I just get a heads up display of, oh, this is the person last time you saw them, you promised you'd do this and you haven't done it or whatever it is. And, and you've got all this context about the world around you. It's like, oh, that planet you're looking at in the sky tonight, that's Mars. Mars is, going to be over our planet for the next little while. Jupiter's that one next to it. There's certain applications for it where you'd be like, this would be truly exciting. And okay, AI probably isn't necessary for all of it, but like a lot of it, as we've seen, can be really enhanced by its own evaluations of what you're seeing. And we know that the vision capabilities are there in AI now to do it too.
I just don't get why Meta is not already just racing. Maybe they are racing
They're still
off.
working on the legs, Mike.
Yeah, they still haven't figured out the legs yet. Why aren't they racing off now? And when you go into the lobby in Meta, creating all these like virtual AI driven characters so that it feels like there's a lot of people in there because like no one really uses it that much. But I think that would be one way they can get a head start here is just go all in on the AI applications in their metaverse to sort of beat Apple to the punch because it's going to be a couple of years before I think they're selling a huge amount of these units when I can go and buy the Quest 3 or whatever they call it now, that new AR one
But I
for.
mean, do you think Apple is the kind of company that wants to create that stuff? They're more about building the hardware and the operating system. They're not really ever making their own software
No, but I
within
think their
them.
ecosystem of developers that are now looking at this technology and saying, well, I want to access a big audience and I want to get my app sold to as many people as possible. Are now thinking about applications. And if Meta caught some of them and says, hey,
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, I just think there's a lot of potential here for the future of entertainment. Like it's inevitable if you can create these engaging worlds that you can be a part of and insert yourself into. This could become one of the most addictive technologies of our lifetime. Like,
Absolutely. And like, you've shown me throughout the week people building these, Chat GPT or other LLM model based personal chatbots that take on a persona and people are paying to chat with like a virtual girlfriend or a virtual friend or just a tutor or whatever it happens to be. Those are immensely popular. Once that has a full interactivity and you can interact with like an AI bot that remembers you, remembers what you said, remember what you asked it about, that I think that sort of companionship and that sort of relationship, even in an educational context, could be highly valued by people. I'd use it. I've mentioned a few times I'm learning German. If I had that ability to sort of interact with a large language model that appears to me as a person who can speak to me and correct my language, I'd use it for sure.
yeah, it seems like there's a lot of applications for this that, I mean, we probably can't fathom all of them yet, but there's some really obvious ones. And we did that whole special when we were speculating about this device from Apple that, you would potentially have a virtual tutor. Like, this is what I mean. Even in the workplace, I know everyone's trying to like order everyone back to the office now, but it seems that a device like this is the complete counter to that. Like, you can be in the office, but you just slap on the headset. It could also destroy international travel for meetings because if you really feel a presence in the room.
Yes, that's a really good point. People who are traveling specifically to have meetings, as long as the internet's there, which it probably will be, I could see that. You could get that level of personal contact from it. without actually having to travel there. You're right. I think there are positives to it. There's a lot of positives to it. And I like, even though I don't tend to use Apple products myself, you can definitely see that they get the technology right. And despite, I think it's only such a high cost because it must have to be, because it's at the bleeding edge of the technology.
Yeah, I
And
mean, you
I
look at
think
what they've packed into it. I don't really understand.
I think I'm cynical enough and inflation's high enough, despite what they're trying to do with interest rates, that people are going to buy them like mad. Like, I don't think the cost is going to off put anyone. I think people can afford it and will buy it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the price is never. I mean, they sell a monitor stand for $1,000 and people buy it. Like, they're fine. They're gonna be fine. Okay, so to sort of wrap up our amazing WWDC coverage here, I thought this
we're
was
pivoting the podcast to be about
yeah. Apparently, we're an
reality.
Apple podcast now, but I do think there's a lot of overlap and a lot of themes intersecting here that are worth discussing.
It will intersect. I think that's what we're really saying here, is that while they may not have an AI play in this current announcement, they're going to have a horse in this race. If it's not them, it's going to be the developer community who are going to, bring that technology into their new headset.
I'd be curious too if any developers are listening to this podcast and want to reach out to us and share. Maybe that you don't want to share, but if you are working on this, or if you're interested in this as a platform, I'd be really curious to know.
Yeah, me too. It's always nice to hear what people are working on.
So there was an article in Mashable. I just wanted to call out this quote from it. Apple avoids AI at WWDC. And it said Federighi made this point subtly, not on stage, but on the page. In a post-game interview with Fast Company, he raised the specter of malign AI-driven deepfakes. Your loved one supposedly calling you because they forgot their password, for example. We want to do everything we can to make sure that we're flagging deepfake threats in the future, Federighi said. So they definitely are, as I said earlier, going with this angle of, of like, we're going to protect you from the AI demon spawn.
I think it's the classic thing, though. It's almost like, that thing with your reputation. Once your reputation's broken, you can't get it back. So they're probably just they're the richest company in the world or close to it. I think they're just, being careful and not taking some unnecessary risk in a market that really doesn't know what it is yet.
Yeah, and it's typical Apple, right? They'll wait on the sidelines, watch this play out, see where it's going, and maybe in 2 years we'll get some sort of, breakthrough product. Or maybe it is the developer community that just turns the iPhone and this new Vision Pro headset into the platforms of the future for AI before robots come and inevitably kill us all. Hopefully first stack my dishwasher, then maybe death. But I really want to live in a time when that
As someone
happens.
who has a broken dishwasher at the moment, I welcome the AI overlords to come and do my dishes. I'm always open to that. Yep.
If they gave us like a 20-year horizon, it would be fine. All right. Speaking of the future, we have a very important update to share with listeners.
Yes, the update is that we're quitting the podcast because we're rich from gambling.
Yeah. So we haven't mentioned it in a while, and for those people new to the show, we early on we were playing around with two really stupid use cases for AI. The first was trying to build AGI with all the tools that were available today, which I know Baby AGI and a few other of these things came out and weren't that great, but we were playing around with that early on. And the second was, can we stack the odds in our favor by using the AI to enhance our ability to gamble on certain events in order to win a lot of money and at significant odds. And I want to read you a transcript from a chat Chris and I had recently about a particular bet. So I'll read this to you and then I'll give you the kind of backstory of where we're at with this. Yeah. So did you win? Chris, it's running now. It's coming second. Me, if this works, we should become professional gamblers. Chris, lol, yeah. Chris, it's in the lead now. Still a bit to go. Me, this is nuts. Chris, photo finish. Me, Chris, it came in second. Me.
This reflects very well on us.
So, yeah, obviously, I'm trying to censor the hell out of this, but we didn't win the first race, and this is the first time we've actually tried to bet on horse racing And
Yeah, and so the advantage of horse racing, just so everyone knows, is it's on all the time.
yeah, it's literally
Like, 'cause I was
something.
doing it, I was trialing it on sports before, like AFL matches and things like that, but they're only on the weekends, and I'm busy on the weekends. I don't have time to be sitting around running AI models and gambling. So, but horses are on all the time. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and so by no means we're endorsing gambling. In fact, in Australia, there's a huge gambling problem. Gambling is readily legal. I think we're the biggest gamblers in the world, and I honestly hope one day they ban most of it. But if we can kind of screw over some of these gambling companies by stacking the odds in the people's favor and letting them win money, we thought, well, this is a good use case of AI. So we didn't win the first race, but never fear. We weren't going to give up that easily. So we
wouldn't raise it if we'd lost, would we?
Yeah, of course not. Typical gamblers.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the end outcome here is that we started getting the AI to pick something quite difficult, which is the first 4 horses. Is that right? The first 4 horses in order.
The first 4 horses in the race, but not in order. So you don't worry about the order so much, like who are going to be the top 3 or the top 4 horses, basically.
Yeah, which is extremely hard to do, obviously, and so like the odds on it are pretty damn big. And so here is what happened. So for context, we put this bet on in the afternoon. I think it was near dinner time, and I went and had dinner with my family, and then Chris messaged me saying that. Because he put on a different type of bet that we lost.
I just bet on the winner, yeah.
Yeah, but I
didn't know how to bet on the first 4 or whatever. It's too complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, they don't make it easy. Anyway, so here is what happened. So I put this bet on. It cost me $24. I think that's like the minimum bet for this kind of structured bet. And I load up my phone. And I turned $24 into $1,278, all thanks to AI stacking the odds in favor. And to be clear, I think I had $40 in my account from previous smaller bets that we had won through AI as well. So it's by no means I'm not down money, or I haven't actually lost anything. I'm just up now by about $1,300. And so, Chris, can you explain to everyone listening how this works, why AI can potentially give you an edge in things like this? I think...
Yeah, and so I do want to go through it because I want to make it clear. I'm not at all claiming that large language models can predict the future or anything like that. Nothing can. And what I think its advantages are, it's not magic, but what it is able to do is take into account a lot of information at once. And to be clear, to do this, we're using Anthropic's 100K Claude model.
You just got us banned, but go on.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, like, I hope not, because, yeah, like, I really, really like that model, and we're using it for legitimate things as well. This is just experimentation. Please, overlords, do not ban me.
Please, Anthropic.
However, what's amazing about it is you can give it the full history of every race that every horse has been in. And like, I've never really been in the horse racing community, but these guys, they store a lot of information, like everything you could possibly know about a horse, everything it's ever done, the kind of gear it's got on its head, who the jockey is, the jockey trainer, whatever combination. It's a lot of information. And my real assessment here is that the AI isn't really doing anything magic, but what it is doing is similar to what a human would do if you could not just have access. Well, I mean, everyone has access to the information, it's free online, but like sort of take it all into your mind at once and think about, oh, how does this factor affect this factor? And does the jockey, whatever rider combination in here, have they ridden before? Have they ridden at this distance? Have they ridden at this distance with this jockey, with this trainer? Have they ridden in this weather? Because it takes into account, like if it's a wet track and all this sort of stuff. So there's just so many factors that you have to take into account. And I know there's racing people who do this themselves, with their own human brains, but this is being done in a matter of 30 seconds, just by literally giving it a URL where it scrapes all the information of all the horse history and doing it. And one really, really interesting thing that it does consistently is I don't give it any odds information. So I don't tell it who's the favorite, any of that. And yet it very often will will pick the favorite. Like it'll say, this is the horse that's going to win. And this is part of the problem with the system, right? The favorite doesn't always win, but it's picking one that's $1.50 to one. So it's not really worth, the juice isn't worth the squeeze kind of thing. And I think the next evolution of it is for it to do these ones we're talking about, where it's picking multiple combinations and ones where the payoff is so big that you only have to be right some of the time. But the other interesting thing that we noticed through trying this out, and we've only tried it a couple of times, is that often in the information you give it, there's sort of like the horse racing experts assessment, like, oh, this horse, she's coming off a 4-week break, and one was slow here last time, one to keep safe or prefer others, and all this jargon that they use in the horse racing community. If you include that in the prompt, um, then the model gets really lazy and it'll just use that as its own assessment. It'll just completely bypass the whole thinking process and just tell you that and regurgitate it. And it's really bad. And so, what I've noticed from doing it is you actually have to sort of give it the raw information with no biases, even in the way you do the question, to get a sort of more accurate response from it.
Yeah, and this is one thing we've talked about on the show before, and it's been covered in a paper I'm sure we read in the past around the attention problem of these models, where you can't really keep its attention focused, and it's very easily influenced when you put bias in. Actually, it was only a couple of weeks ago we talked about this. You can easily introduce bias into the model by, I think the answer is this. And that will bias it towards that outcome more likely than not. And so we encountered that problem directly when trying to make this this app find the right combination of winners.
But what absolutely blows me away is I've experienced in other things, just experiments I've done with larger models, larger context windows, and that kind of thing, is can it remember some arbitrary instruction from somewhere in it when there's all this other information? And what's remarkable about it is its ability to make assessments, and you can ask it questions interactively after it's made its assessment to go, well, why did you pick these horses? Like, what was it about them that made you think that they would win? And what else could happen? Do you think there are other possibilities? And it's able to really make those assessments quite quickly and quite without missing anything. It doesn't forget things in the context window. I mean, I know that's obvious and I know that's what it's meant to do. I shouldn't be surprised by it. But when you're actually doing it, it just has this feeling like, wow, that is really, really remarkable. And it keeps bringing me back to, we're not quite at the level where we know prescriptively or scientifically, I suppose, how to get the prompts to do a certain thing. Like there's a certain incantation to it. You've got to work with it and get it right. Small things like, for example, that bias we just spoke about can throw it off. Whereas if you can sort of massage the data you're giving it, it gives really good results.
But it does speak to the need to tune the AI, right? Like, sort of massage. Like, I think something it exposed for me is these large language models are so powerful at becoming almost domain experts in the fact that it can become essentially this expert in horse racing when given the right prompts and context and maneuvered the right way.
I mean, that day we had a win in every race except for one that we
Yeah.
bet on, and I think it was about 6 in a row, and only one lost, and it came second, which was the one you quoted the chat transcript from. Like, and it's only our feeble human brains who get greedy and whatever, and it's like, well, I'm not just going to bet on one, I'm going to bet on four. That do it. Like, if you just simply let it pick its number one pick each time, it would be well and truly up, and you could automate that. And I think that it's very, very interesting, because I think the next layer, and we're seeing this a lot in all the releases in the sort of AI community this week, it's a lot of this instruction planning related stuff. Everyone's realizing that you're going to need supervisory agents that are making decisions on how to coordinate the worker agents in what they're doing. So, to give a specific example here with the gambling one, it's not enough for us to just point it at a race and say, what do you reckon? And then we go off what it thinks and then go place the bets. You need another thing that then assesses that information and goes, okay, based on this model and its history of success and weaknesses, I reckon we stay off this race because I reckon it's not sure. Or based on its history, I think, we go for the first four, or we just go for the straight winner because I think that's what we need. And I think that extra layer on top of it is what is needed, that extra bit of human thinking that we're applying to it. It's definitely capable of doing that, but I think we still feel that it's needed for us to make the final assessment there.
Yeah, so it's definitely still AI plus human, but what
Yeah.
you're saying is that, and I think, you know, the entire AI community is discovering this at the same time, is that to have true agency where you have an AI that can act as an agent and make decisions and manage the budget of the gambling to make sure you're always up and always place the right bet. At this point in the technology, what we're talking about here is multiple agents working together cohesively towards a single goal as opposed to a single agent.
Yeah, exactly. And it could be the same model, it could be the same system underneath, but I guess different prompts like we'd be talking about. Or, we say agent, but it's really like a combination of models with a specific mission or objective. I think that's how I would describe it. And I think that I'm seeing increasingly things where people are having a planning agent that actually plans out, okay, these are the abilities you have, which ones am I going to use to accomplish this task, and how will I evaluate the results from each. Because the other thing we're definitely seeing is like imprecise results. Like you can put the same data into the same thing, and sometimes it'll just go well off track and be totally wrong, and other times it'll be incredibly accurate. So you need sort of this assessment that's like, okay, that was valid, that wasn't valid, and those kind of things. And I think the planning and assessment kind of agents working together brings us a lot more closer to something we would consider intelligence, or at least giving us the benefits of intelligence, than just straight up thinking you've cracked the formula for something and you can just keep running it over and over again.
And this can be applied as well pretty easily to another form of gambling, the stock market, where you essentially the same kind of concept, right? Like learning everything there is about a bunch of companies in a potential market, having different agents accounting for where you should place the bets, if you should short, all of those different combinations. This seems like a pretty good use case, or a specialized product that.
Look, I think so, and we've discussed this on previous podcasts about, that's coming down the pipe inevitably, as we go forward, because it makes total sense. Like just this ability to take in vast quantities of information and make assessments, take into account historical information, being given historical examples of where it worked and where it didn't. It's absolutely going to work in that market. Of course, it's a sort of game theory thing, because at some point everybody's going to have access to these tools and they'll all be using them. So, that probably has to be taken into account as well. Like if you were the only one to have it, for example, then you'd probably have a pretty significant advantage over other people, even just in the leverage of thinking. Like you can, as a human, probably assess stocks better than the AI can, maybe, like potentially, especially if you've got experience. However, it can do it on all of them. Like it can literally go through every single one and go, you know what? This one you're looking at, I know you spent a lot of time researching it, but there's this one over here that's actually slightly better, that you should look at, but you didn't have time to research it. So I think that it's a case where it's just leverage. It's just thinking leverage. It's like, if people often say that about themselves when they're busy, like, oh, if only there could be 10 of me, if only there could be 20 of me, I'd get so much done because I know what I'm doing in this space and whatever, but I have limited time. The AI doesn't have limited time. It has limited hardware maybe, or money, but essentially you can multiplex yourself and your way of thinking, and even perhaps a better way of thinking, and get that leverage to get better results.
Yeah, I think that multiplex point is so true. Like the world of agents is definitely coming, where we're spending most of our time curating and crafting agents as opposed to actually doing maybe the job replacement is just the form of agency of crafting these agents to perform tasks. It's going to be interesting though to see what happens in the stock market. Like, do investors become just super informed? And in the betting world that we're dealing with, is like, do these companies, could they potentially go out of business? Like if two idiots like us on a podcast release this to everyone, what would happen?
And who's to say we won't?
Yeah, and who's to say we mightn't be working on releasing it in the next couple of weeks to everyone? And then maybe these gambling companies might, get a bit of a taste of what it's like to have the odds stacked against them.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah, exactly. I mean, horse betting, if I understand correctly, is like a pari-mutuel market where you're really just betting against other people. I think the sports betting companies do fine no matter what happens because they adjust their odds so they're getting equal money on different things. I'm no expert on it. I think when you get to like sports betting and same game multis and stuff, that's where they would probably really, really not like it. But it's hard to say. And coincidentally, I've been running it on baseball as well, and I've got one going at the moment that seems to be going well. So obviously, I'll only report it if it wins. So
Yeah.
you'll hear about
Everyone
it.
will get access to this tool and just lose like so much money. It could be the best endorsement for addictive gambling that,
Well, and
that was ever built.
this is the point I want to make is you're still ultimately making the decision of what to do with the information it gives you. Excuse me. And I think that's where we need to advance it to the next level, which is where it makes the decisions as well. And you're really just going, okay, this is like my what do they call it? Like high frequency trading bot in the stock market that you just algorithmically give a budget and allow it to go run an experiment for you. And I think that, that's what we're trying to get to with this.
It's that whole the funniest outcome is the most likely or something. Like maybe what happens is we accidentally invent AGI through the gambling project.
And also give it a way to get itself resources to empower itself to take over the world.
And the AGI event is just this drunken gambling AI. All it wants to do is bet on everything.
Yeah, yeah. Just one more shot.
Anyways, we'll keep you updated on this project. We haven't mentioned it in a couple of weeks because we haven't had that much exciting to share, but now it's working pretty reliably. We want to, our next step is to start to gather some data. Like, is this an anomaly? Like, are we just getting lucky?
I think that's the thing. You don't want to get ahead of yourself and say, because we had, a little string of wins there on one day or a couple of days worth of wins. Is that really saying that you have something? It could be total fluke, and remember, a lot of the time it was picking the favorite. So, that isn't so profound. Anyone can bet on the favorite. It's just that it happened to whenever it picked the favorite, it won, so favorites don't always win. So it's interesting. And I think, yeah, let's keep reporting on it. And ultimately, I'd love to find a way to sort of share the results in advance in a way that can't be manipulated, like blockchain style. So it's like, you're not just like I'm admitting to is just reporting now that we're winning. Like I think that it'd be nice to be able to say, here, this is what I'm going to do, and here's what happened.
Yeah, I think having some like data collection around it where people have to log their bets using it, and then we store that over time, and we have a website maybe that shows statistically does it give you an edge or not by having thousands of people potentially using it would be super interesting.
I also think an agent that has memories where you can punish it for its failures. It's like, you really screwed up on this one, mate. Like, this has really affected my life. Don't get it wrong again. Learn from this lesson. Like look at all that you've got, all this information, you still got it wrong. Like I really need you to do better. I think that kind of thing is really going to help it. AIs love examples, and I reckon if we give it examples of its failures, then it'll need to improve.
Yeah, again, not an endorsement for gambling. Gambling ruins so many people's lives. It's a horrible thing, and I honestly deep down don't like it.
Like, and I'm definitely not saying that like the gambling is the only application for it. What I like about it is it's a thing where there's a definite result. It's like this is your thought, and you get an actual validation or invalidation of that thought. And I think that that's what's interesting to me about it. And it sort of pushes the model to, what it's really capable of with reasoning and explaining its logic and all that. So
I think it's important why we originally settled on this idea is not only that, but also we were like, how can we use this technology to make insane amounts of money? Because if there's some sort of singularity, this is exactly what you would do if you had control of it, right? You would just go and create infinite wealth by exploiting every mechanism of this technology. And that's really how we landed to maybe try this out. But
yeah, and as we know, if you ask the AI what it would do to do that, it would create a disinformation campaign the likes of which the world has never seen. So this is a sort of muted version of that, I think. It wouldn't bother with money. It would just go for power.
The final thing I'll say on it is it's the weirdest experience because I never bet on horse racing or rarely do. And to put in this like box finish combination by being told by the AI what to plug in.
It is kind of funny that like your second ever bet was like you got the first 4 horses in the race right. Like that's got to raise some red flags over it.
So we're being banned from Anthropic, Sportsbet. What else?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's why we need the podcast.
If anyone from those companies is listening, please let this play out. It's going to be fun. I assure you, it's good promotion, really. And let's keep the good times rolling. All right. This is going to end poorly. All right. I want to play a clip now from Sam Altman's world tour of self-importance continuing. This time, Sam Altman takes on India. Let's listen to the clip and then we'll talk about it.
Sounds good.
Sam, can you just going to startups? I mean, as you know, we've got a very vibrant startup ecosystem in India. Specifically focused on AI, are there spaces where you see, let's say, a startup from India building, you can build on the models, be it ChatGPT and many others. But if you want to build foundational models, how should we think about that? Where is it that a team from India, 3 super smart engineers with, not 100 million, but let's say 10 million, could actually build something truly substantial?
Look, the way this works is we're going to tell you it's totally hopeless to compete with us on training foundation models. You shouldn't try, and it's your job to, try anyway. And I believe both of those things. I think it is pretty hopeless, but...
So he says, I think it is pretty hopeless. My first interpretation of that clip was that it was somewhat sarcasm, like, ha ha ha, we're really good, ha ha, but you should still try, hint, hint. But it seems like no one's really interpreted it that way, and everyone, it's almost come across as this arrogance, like, we're so far ahead, we're the best at this, and don't even try, you'll never catch up, India. And I feel like India, game on.
Yeah, and I think India is a country that could do it. That's the thing. I think it's one of those things where, someone says it like, oh yeah, no, I'm just being sarcastic and joking. But I reckon he really thinks that. I think that they're like, this is our thing. Please don't do our thing. Like, you can use our stuff, and that's why I'm doing my world tour to encourage you to use our products. But don't do this is off limits. Only we can do the Bedrock algorithm. Sorry, I shouldn't use Bedrock. Only we can use the, what do they call them? Base models or whatever like that. That's our territory. We own all the hardware. We're in the pocket with the government now. And we're going to block anyone else from building them.
Yeah, it seemed really arrogant to me. And the fact he originally set out on this tour to inspire people and learn about how people were using the technology. But if you don't fit into their sort of narrow lane of, we're the rock stars of this world, no one else can compete, we're the number one, then maybe that was his true colors shining through. It's really, I've said it many times, it's really hard to like this guy. I'm sure maybe in person he's really charming, and
like, why say it? Like, if you think you've got this sort of position, unassailable position where no one can do it, and first of all, what company in history has ever been in that position and kept it? And you think you've got this position, why crush the hopes and dreams of these people who are really interested in the same thing you are and genuinely want to participate in it? It just seems wrong.
Yeah, I really hope we're talking in a couple of years, maybe a year from now, and saying India's released like India GPT and it's like 1 billion times better.
They got the highest population in the world. They're really into tech.
Insanely smart people.
Yeah, I just don't see why you would write off an entire country and just be like, guys, don't bother.
Yeah, I don't know. It could have been sarcasm though, and he's just tired on his... I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here and say that maybe... But it's definitely making waves. It's trending right now on Twitter as we speak, and a lot of people are playing that clip. So probably not the PR that he wanted. Interestingly, last week we covered an article about the roadmap for GPT-4. That's on the previous episode. If you want to go back and find that, it's in the chapter index on the podcast and on YouTube if you want to find it. But interestingly, I had to go back and find that article on Wayback When Machine because the blog outlining the details from this talk had been deleted. I later found out on Twitter, and I said I'd investigate it on last week's show, that it's alleged that OpenAI asked them to delete it because I think that they didn't want that information out there. But obviously they just drew a lot more attention to it. And that was where they were talking about GPU availability. And so
Yes,
it does
yeah, I
sound
remember.
like that one of the problems, and we know this, is just access right now to the hardware in order to train these models. And we know there's a hardware shortage because he said it. And you can see that through NVIDIA's stock.
NVIDIA.
Did you like that?
It's good. I prefer it pronounced that way. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know. Like I guess I haven't been involved directly in trying to train a massive model, and like, they cost a lot of money, and we've definitely seen the models that can be trained on smaller amounts of hardware in less time that give, 80% of the results and things like that. The question is how important is it to always have the absolute best one when we don't even know what you can get out of them? And also, if you can train one that's 80% of GPT-4, but you don't have the restrictions that they perhaps apply in terms of, API cost, in terms of censorship, in terms of the things we spoke about last week with the alignment, where, this isn't aligned to the problem you're trying to solve. It's aligned to being a chatbot that appeals to the masses. Maybe it isn't necessary to have the largest one with the most parameters. That might not be the best thing. So I think that there is a certain arrogance there, thinking, oh well, it's only if you control all of the hardware and you only are the one to do the biggest thing that you have the absolute advantage. Because I don't think all of the advantages of this AI revolution come from just being the best model at the current moment.
Yeah, and the question is, will we see a breakthrough where, just like the human brain, you said this last week, you don't need to be trained on 1 million dog images to understand what a dog looks like.
Mm.
Maybe
Yeah,
there's a
exactly.
different way of doing this that the models can learn much
Well, and
faster.
I think that's what we're seeing in the community this week in particular is, and even in our own experimentation, is this idea of agency and this idea of planning and, and the chain of thought reasoning. We're seeing more papers come out about the how to best apply a chain of thought reasoning to get the best results from your AI models. And it's certainly the case where you see, like, a great example, because it's visual, is things like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and DALL-E. People who can craft really good prompts for them get miles better results than just casually doing it. Or if you use a large language model to create the prompts, for example, which I've experimented with, it creates so much better prompts for the thing. So there's certainly work that needs to be done on applying the technology more than just making a bigger version of the thing. It'd be like creating the first industrial printing press, but not really giving a shit about what you're printing in the newspapers, like, or the books or whatever it is. There's domains within the technology that need to be explored extensively that they're not going to be able to compete on. And those domains will exist whether or not you have the biggest model or not. So it doesn't just have to happen in the context of OpenAI. There's plenty of other ways that those domains can be explored, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I believe all of this, but the thing I'm still struggling with a little bit is to compare this to early era of search when you had a number of players like Alta Vista and,
Oh, what was the dog pile? Was that one of them?
yeah, there was
Ask
a ton
Jeeves.
of search engines, right? And then Google was just such a clear winner because it had the best results and a minimal UI and blah, blah, blah. But it always stood out, and it's consistently been better and then just became the winner. And I just can't help but think, like, Google's Palm 2 API, it seems like you can now get access to it. I haven't tried it, but from
I've
what...
tried to get access and failed.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then from what I've heard on that, though, like this tweet, I'll pull up and I'll link to it in the show notes. I tested out Google's Palm API. Pros, it's way faster than ChatGPT, almost 3 times as fast. Cons, response quality is awful in comparison.
Mm.
And then you've got Amazon Bedrock, which, like, no one has access to, seemingly, and I think it's still a bit of vaporware or terrible, which is why they haven't released it. So it's sort of like, on one hand, we're saying the competition's coming, but we're all still mostly using either, well, OpenAI because it's available.
I sing the praises of Claude a lot because we have access and I've used it for things and I really like it. But I've noticed in even our own comments on YouTube that people who want to try it perhaps because they've heard us talk about it, or they just want to in general, can't get access. And we've speculated that that's probably because of like lack of hardware. They can't scale it up, for example. The only reason I can think of. So yeah, like I think that's the thing. It's like that it comes back to that real world thing where, in theory competition exists, but in practice, does it? Like, are people really building? The first commercial open source model we saw was Falcon, which has only been out for a week or so, which you need at least an A100 to run. Is anyone building commercially on that on a large scale? So yeah, I guess at this stage, most of what we're seeing, like AI, people adding AI to their applications, it's all open AI. You'd have to think.
Yeah, and it sort of parallels to this Apple Vision Pro where everyone's like, oh, the first iPhone, it was expensive, not very accessible. They had to ramp up manufacturing. Is that similar for, OpenAI, where it's like these guys have ramped up, it's readily available, it is operating at huge scale, and then everyone else is trying to like figure it out, and they're like the iPhone and the Android phones are coming. Maybe that's a better way to think about it.
That is a good way that's exactly what I think about it. I think inevitably hardware catches up. It might take a little bit of time. There's also the thing I said where I don't think, it's like we're squeezing lemons, but we're just doing it like with a little teaspoon or something, and we're not, we don't have a juicer available. I think that there's more to be got to. Can I say that? More to be gotten? There's more to be got. Whatever. I need AI to correct
We've
my
said
English,
so much stupid stuff on this show, I'm sure, like, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. The AI, when the AI is transcribing it, it can figure that out for me. But you know what I mean? I think there's more to be. I can't say it, that we can get more out of the existing models, like, at lower hardware limits. And I think that, limits inspire creativity. If you've got limits on what you can do, you will get more out of what you've gotten. And that's why you still, like, there's people out there still making games for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, right? And they make these amazing games, getting more out of the hardware, the same hardware that they had back then. And I think constraints lead to what, good creativity and really interesting things. So I don't think we need to be constantly sitting around waiting for the next like GPT-5 or whatever it is. I think we need to take some time and explore what's here and what's capable. And that's what I see. Like when you look on Reddit, Twitter, Hacker News, Hugging Face, and all the different platforms where people are releasing things, there's some really, really interesting applications of technology. And you're seeing like different industries like education and medicine mobilizing and starting to talk about AI. I read an article in the New England Journal of Medicine this week about, renewed interest in applying AI to medical imaging, for example. And that's on the back of papers we've spoken about on here before. So I think that you're starting to see AI become pervasive in different industries where there was just a lack of, like, there's been waves of AI, but there hasn't been this depth of interest and sustained interest that we have now in a long time. And so I think that that's what I'm more excited about. And we've spoken about this before. There's so much good that can come from this technology in the short term before we get to our doomsday scenarios, that that can be done with existing technology. So I'm excited to watch and sit on the sidelines and be involved a bit of what comes of that.
I agree. We've said this, that there it felt like there was this shift of like where everyone was very overwhelmed. Everyone sort of got comfortable with that state of, just constant advancements, and then it's like, okay, now let's go build and see what we can do with this thing. And we talked, and there's a lot of papers this week about chain of thought reasoning and how to get this thing to reason better and stay on track and not lose track of the objective of what it's trying to do and evaluate its own thoughts and decisions that it's making. It does seem like by having these limits, you've got to overcome challenges like this, which actually may long-term improve the state of AI in general, outside of just the obvious challenges like a GPU shortage.
Yeah, and bring all the technology around it. Like one thing I've noticed in the open source community, it's getting increasingly easy to try things. There's Ooga Booga, I think it's called, which is like, a text interface on where you can select different models and run them. Then there's this site I found the other day called RunPod, where you can just like spin up a GPU instance for like a few minutes just to try something out with pre-made templates for models and things like that. So it's gone from being this thing where, oh, I want to get Stable Diffusion running, that's going to take me a whole day, and I need the right hardware and all that, to being able to try things much more quickly. And then someone else has released open source code that'll allow your agents to plan out what they're going to do, for example. So there's a lot of tooling and really nice stuff out there that makes this more accessible. And I say accessible as someone who has the technology skills to do it. But I guess what I'm saying is that there will be time for all of that stuff to develop, so more people can have access and apply it in their respective industries.
Yeah, this idea though that all developers are doomed and there won't be, engineers in the future and they'll all be replaced. I mean, I can't speak for the entire future, but at least in the next decade, I think there's just going to be so many opportunities of wrangling this technology, trying to make it work, and, being that human plus AI in this development process of how we get the maximum benefit of AI in society. And I think having all these open source contributors and tools is so important to the entire ecosystem to be able to get this technology everywhere we want it to be, and into the areas of society we know we need it, like medical breakthroughs and all these other phenomenal areas. But this week we also saw something that did scare me back on the sort of regulation front, which is senators send letter questioning Mark Zuckerberg over Meta's llama leak. And so
imagine explaining that to someone in the 1980s.
Yeah, it just, as a title is so strange.
Maybe even now, if you weren't into this stuff, that sounds like a bunch of nonsense.
It said, "We are writing to request information on how your company assessed the risk of releasing llama, what steps were taken to prevent the abuse of the model, and how you are updating your policies and practices based on its unrestrained availability."
It's abuse because it threatens OpenAI. Otherwise, it would be fine. How are they abusing it? By using it?
It seems to me that the fear maybe here is that other companies will use it for disinformation campaigns, how it leaked onto BitTorrent, the weightings leaked. And maybe what they're getting at is if more powerful models are developed that are a security risk to the United States and they just leak, what that could mean for their overall security. Or it's just we suggested prior to the recording of this episode, Sam Altman has regulators in his back pocket now, and he's like, let's make Facebook the poster child of all the bad stuff of this movement.
But yeah, that's one thing. And I suppose you're right. They must be thinking, I hope they don't do it again, because it's too late to get it back. You can't stop it now. But I think, and, allaying my fears from our very early podcast where I was like, download everything you can because it'll be taken away. That fear of mine is gradually going away because I think that they're not getting rid of those weightings now. That's out there everywhere. But yeah, so they must be fearing Facebook's relative openness in the AI space is obviously a threat to someone, and they're trying to stop them from continuing down that path, which is a shame because what they've done is really spurned on the entire open source community. Really, that was the llama was the real genesis of it. Look, I could be ignorant to that. I'm sure there was other stuff going on, but it's where it really caught attention of mainstream people like me.
Yeah, it is still the most experimented on model from what I can ascertain from Hugging Face as well. It's being used quite a lot still. So I think a lot of
and it's the foundation of other models, people train it further and things like that. So it's not, it's not just the raw llama thing. It's people are, aligning it and all the other stuff they do to it.
All the papers that are coming out of Meta and how they've got this open source approach, I actually don't think that should be restricted. I think it should be encouraged, because the more pervasive these technologies are and everyone has access, the more I think it's less likely to be a risk if everyone's got the same tools longer term. But in the short term, I can't really see how it's that big of a risk right now. Misinformation's already a weapon. It has been through the history of time. Yeah, sure, this will amplify it and make it a bit scarier, but you've still got to mitigate those risks
Yeah, it's
anyway.
funny because I shared with you my kid's school, the principal sent a newsletter around talking about ChatGPT in education, and he was quoting Plato, saying that the invention of the alphabet and people writing down stories will cause everyone to not, remember knowledge and not bother to remember stuff anymore because it's written down. And and then people now worrying about, oh well, like, Wikipedia and ChatGPT, no one will need to learn anything anymore. But that's not how those things played out. Like written language led to probably people getting more knowledge because it could be more easily shared. It didn't require someone telling them it and memorization and those kind of things. So, I think that it's adaptable, that kind of thing, and it probably is maybe not good, but it's not necessarily bad either.
So there was a video that went around on Twitter this week, which was from the BBC. It was a prediction about AI in the future in 1964. I won't play the whole thing, but I thought it was interesting to play for everyone.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
the
for sure.
most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things.
So, a stepping stone to higher things. He's sort of like Larry Page with his speciesist comment that he made to Elon Musk, saying that we're just merely a stepping stone for a higher intelligence in evolution, and comparing us to us to when we evolved beyond the Neanderthals. So do you think he's right?
I mean, it's surprisingly interesting that someone can have that level of thought back then. I mean, it makes sense once you get electric circuits, you think, oh well, this could eventually be like a brain. But some of the comments in there around it, how observing that the early stages of technology were like a stupid one, and then eventually and inevitably it could reach a higher level of intelligence. I mean, that kind of makes sense to me, and I think some people are thinking like that, and I think it's natural why some people fear it, because they're thinking that back then, it's now 90, well, how many years later? When was it? 60s or something?
Yeah, 60 years ago.
Yeah, it's like 90 years later, and 60 years ago. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, and so now we're just at a point like that where some people can have these clear visions of the future, or a future where we'd be subjugated to the computers.
Yeah, everything we're talking about, trying to, in these papers, model human thought, build different modalities. No matter how you look at it, you can't help but think we're just witnessing us trying to rebuild a human brain it's highly evolved. But I think what stood out to me about that clip is he later talks in it, which I didn't play, about, one day, just like we can record data onto a cassette tape or record or whatever was around then.
Yeah.
He says maybe we could do that in our brains one day, and just
He should
instantly,
have just said like the Matrix, like
Yeah.
where you load the skills in.
instantly learn a new language like Chinese, he alludes to in the clip. And it seemed the closest parallel I could relate it to was Neuralink, which is now gone into human trials. So
The only thing I disagree with on that, though, is like even AI models, they need to be trained systematically to adjust the weights in their brain. So it's not like you could just load in a pattern of neurons into your brain. Your brain would still need some kind of training, but maybe it could do it with certain thought patterns that lead to you learning that skill or gaining that knowledge, for example. And I think I wouldn't have even considered that idea. Only some of the papers you've shared with me in previous podcasts around them actually mapping human thoughts and then drawing a picture of a cat or whatever that they were visualizing makes me think, well, if you can find out the format of thoughts and play all the thoughts in a certain order, perhaps you can force someone to think through learning at least knowledge, if not a skill.
Soon we'll be being shown 1 million images of dogs in our brain.
Just like with Neuralink, I'm not gonna go first is the only thing. Like, maybe I don't know what skill I would want badly enough that I'd subject myself to that. Not really sure.
You said when I played you this clip the first time, it reminded you of a book. Well,
yeah, so I'm reading a George Orwell book called Coming Up for Air. And I got it like at a secondhand bookstore where I had too many wines after dinner or something, and I never read it. And I picked it up the other day, and I was reading it. And early on, there's this quote that I found really, in my mind, very much relates to some people's fear about what's coming with AI. To give some context of this book, it was written and published in the late 1930s. So George Orwell had been through World War One. And World War II, sort of some people could see it coming. They saw the threat that Hitler posed. Like Winston Churchill was one of those people. He wasn't in Parliament at the time, and he was one of the people who saw the threat of Hitler when everyone else was putting him on Time magazine and saying what a great bloke he is. And so George Orwell was clearly someone who saw what was coming with the war. So I'll read you this quote. I've abridged it slightly just for time, but I just want you to think about this and think about how some people feel about AI coming and what impacts it might have on the world. It says, I was walking westward up the Strand. Enough noise to waken the dead, but not to waken this lot, I thought. I felt as if I was the only person awake in a city of sleepwalkers. And this kind of prophetic feeling that keeps coming over me nowadays, the feeling that war's just round the corner and that war's the end of all things, isn't peculiar to me. We've all got it, more or less. Whatever I thought you think, there's always 1 million people thinking it at the same moment. That was how I felt. We're all on this burning deck and nobody knows it except me. Like turkeys in November, I thought. Not a notion of what's coming to them. It was as if I'd got X-rays in my eyes and could see the skeletons walking. And then he sort of goes on from there talking about how he visualizes London being war torn and like the bombs coming overhead, the fighter planes, which actually did happen to London, with the Blitz and all that. And he sort of talks in vivid detail about what he visualizes happening. And as I was reading it, I couldn't help but think that when you have the more extreme thoughts about what AI could become, I could see how people could definitely visualize a future in which, it's bad because of what happens with AI. And so, yeah, I don't know what to make of that. It just really stood out to me as sort of being sympathetic to people who have the sort of more extreme beliefs when it comes to, what this technology could lead to.
the future seemed obvious to this individual in 1960, and that future seemed logical, written in that book by George Orwell before World War II. There's a lot of predictions about where things might lead. There's all the different statements about AI safety. Do you think it's a case where everyone knows the direction we're heading and just, like, we all have that deep sinking feeling that maybe that's the direction longer term? And I'm not talking short term, but longer term. And it's this uncomfortable feeling of the uncertainty of it all.
But I guess the point is, it's like, if everyone had, if George Orwell had made his opinions known and everyone had listened to him, what could they have done to prevent it anyway? And it's similar with the guy who's predicting, computers becoming smarter than us. If he'd wanted to stop that somehow, what could he have done? Like killed John von Neumann or something? Like, there's a certain inevitability to this stuff. And I think somewhat that's what Orwell's saying there. Like, he sees this future, but he's not going to do anything to try to prevent it because he can't. And so I don't know. And I just don't think that the sort of Pyrrhic efforts of governments around safety are anything more than political machinations and them, trying to protect their interest. I just don't see anyone who actually is trying to genuinely stop this because they think it's an existential threat. But also, I'm not good at politics. I don't really know.
I don't think it's going to stop. And like I always say, I don't know what we're witnessing in this time in history, but it's going to be very, very interesting to see. We've got Apple Vision bro, with this augmented world, we've got AI, still.
I mean, it's so like, I know I've brought it up before, but the book series of books Perry wrote, and where they discover the alien race on the moon, and they're all sitting in their personal entertainment devices like zombies. Just literally, their spaceship is just parked on the moon because they're all so entertained by these devices. We're getting awfully close to that, where people are just sitting around with these things on their head, just watching movies or pretending to work or whatever the hell they're doing. Like it's it's actually happening. It's kind of
It could be that like you come to Earth in the future and everyone does have their headset
just
on,
laying around.
It's like TikTok now, when people are on that thing, they're like zombies. It's like 100 times worse with these AI headsets. And then there's robots like attending to their bed sores and stuff because we conquered AI just to keep the entertainment rolling.
I mean, it's not that far-fetched. That's what's so crazy about it. Like, they've got the tech. Like, you just need the robots next to tend to the bed sores or whatever it is, and we're there.
Oh, man. Oh, it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds.
Get your orders from the government through your Neuralink, and you're away.
What orders? I think everyone will just be sitting like with their headsets. Even there'll be no government, and it'll just be robots looking after us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, I'll still try one.
Yeah, I'll definitely try it, of course.
Yeah.
All right, that'll do us for this episode. We heard you loud and clear about getting more content out there. We've talked about it. We have some ideas about slotting in some additional very focused topics for you to listen to. Some ideas around when we eventually get this gambling AI working well. We think we're going to record an episode a day at the races to prove to you that it works and record that live for you so that you can look forward to a little bit more content from us, hopefully coming soon. But don't hold us to it. We're very busy with our day jobs.
That's right. We reserve the right to be massive hypocrites at all times.
Very hypocritical podcast, this show. If you like this episode and you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing, leaving us a comment to help spread the word, and doing all that stuff I remind you at the end of every episode to do each week. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.